The morning sun had barely crested the red cliffs when Dakota stepped out from his lodge, the cold air brushing against his skin like lingering memories. The land was waking, ravens calling across the canyon, dry grass swaying in the faint breeze, the desert stretching endlessly under a wide, pale sky. It was the kind of morning he would usually welcome, taking a deep breath and thanking the Creator for another day. But today, there was a heaviness lodged deep in his chest, a weight that had settled there ever since Aiden left. The young man had departed almost a year ago, eager, hopeful, and far too brave for his own good. Dakota remembered the boy's earnest smile as he promised he'd find work in the nearest town, then return with enough money to rebuild a home for the two of them. "A real house, Dakota," Aiden had said with shining eyes. "One where the wind doesn't blow through the cracks. One with a roof taller than both of us." Dakota had laughed and placed a hand over the boy's heart. "You already carry a home inside here," he told him. Aiden had always blushed easily, quickly looking away to hide how much those words meant to him. It wasn't blood that bound them. It was something stronger. Dakota had found the child years ago, abandoned and alone, terrified of the warriors who discovered him. But Dakota had knelt instead of striking fear, offering warmth instead of anger. Over time, the orphan boy learned the Apache ways, learned to hunt rabbits, learned to braid rope, learned to laugh again. In return, Aiden gave Dakota companionship he hadn't known he needed, a son in every way but name, and then he left, chasing a dream. One letter arrived after he departed, shaky handwriting telling of a long road, a caravan of traders, and the promise he would write again soon. That promise was why Dakota stood outside every morning, his heart caught between hope and fear, his gaze fixed on the trail for the sight of a courier or rider bringing news. On this morning, he finally saw one. A rider on a dusty mule approached with the casual ease of someone who had been traveling for days. His hat tipped low, bandana gray with dust, saddlebag stuffed full. He stopped when he reached Dakota, rummaging through his bag until he produced a thin envelope. Dakota's hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. The envelope was familiar, too familiar. His own handwriting stared back at him, and stamped over the front. In bold red letters that burned into his vision, "Returned to Sandier for a long moment." Dakota didn't breathe. The rider tipped his hat, muttered a few words, then nudged his mule and continued onward. The world faded into silence around him. Even though the morning was alive with sounds, birds, insects, the wind whispering through rock and sand, Dakota could not move. His letter, the one he had, written after weeks of waiting and worrying, had been returned untouched. Aiden's name crossed out by an unfamiliar hand. No forwarding address. No explanation. Why would the boy not write back? The question carved into Dakota's heart like a blade. He stared at the envelope, feeling the creeping cold of dread tighten around his ribs. Aiden was young, barely 17 winters behind him. Too small to fight off grown men. Too kind to see danger coming. Too trusting in a world that often punished such goodness. The wind lifted the corner of the envelope, almost gently, as though the land itself urged him to act. Dakota inhaled sharply, the decision blooming inside him like fire. He would not wait. He would not hope in silence. He would find Aiden, wherever the road had taken him. Inside his chest, a vow formed with the force of thunder. "I will bring my son home." Dakota turned toward his lodge, muscles tightening with purpose. He began gathering his bow, his knife, his horse's saddle. Every movement was sharp, controlled, driven by fear, but fueled by love. A tribe elder nearby watched him for a moment, then called out, "Where do you ride, Dakota?" He answered without pause, his voice steady and unwavering. "To every village until I find the boy who should have never left my side." And so, The Apache warrior mounted his horse and rode out into the growing day, the envelope tucked safely against his heart. The search for his young man beginning with the first pounding beat of hooves against the earth. Dakota rode through the canyon shadows. Like a man pursued by ghosts, though the only spirit haunting him was the thought of Aiden lost, somewhere in the world, calling for him, needing him. Hours passed beneath the pounding rhythm of hooves. The land changed around him, from rugged cliffs to open stretches of pale desert where heat shimmered like a mirage. His horse, a sturdy roan with a patient soul, snorted and pressed onward as if sensing Dakota's urgency. Aiden's voice kept echoing in Dakota's mind, the way he spoke when he was excited, so full of belief in tomorrow. "I'll build a life and come back for you." Those words, once a source of pride, now cut like a blade. It wasn't the boy's dream that troubled Dakota. It was how the world could crush dreams and swallow good hearts whole. Aiden was too young to see the cruelty that lurked behind smiles, too soft to understand how fast trust could shatter. Dakota had seen such things. He had lived through them. When he was a younger warrior, he fought battles against enemies who took everything they could: land, freedom, even the future. He had watched settlers deceive starving families with promises, only to send soldiers when the people were weakened. He had carried friends who never opened their eyes again. He had buried children whose names faded faster than their memories. So when Aiden left, Dakota's heart split in two, one part proud of the young man's bravery, the other terrified of the world waiting to consume him. Yet he had let him go, because love, Dakota believed, was not a prison. He looked down at the letter tucked into his shirt, the one marked "Return to Sender." The paper was wrinkled now from how tightly he had held it during the ride. But the red letters seared his mind anew each time. He looked. It was not just a letter that had been returned. It was a warning. By midday, Dakota reached a crossroads where two narrow trails split. One led northwest to where traders traveled between mining camps. The other curved south, toward settlements known to harbor men who trafficked in desperation and in people. Dakota closed his eyes, letting the land speak. He listened to the wind, the beat of his horse's breathing, the faint rustle of sagebrush. And then he remembered Aiden's last letter, the one that had arrived months ago. The boy had mentioned a caravan traveling south. Then he clicked his tongue against his teeth, guiding his horse onto the rougher path. As he rode, the silence of the desert deepened, stretching wide and lonely. Dakota imagined Aiden walking this road once, his feet blistered, his smile stubborn, his gaze chasing possibility like a sunrise. The image was beautiful and unbearable. He pushed it away. Ahead, the land dipped into a shallow valley coated with dust. Faint wagon tracks scored the ground, signs of travel. But alongside those tracks were others that made his pulse quicken, prints of horses that rode unburdened, too many for a simple escort. Circular impressions from wheels that swerved as though someone had driven hard under fear. And scattered in the dirt, drops of something dark. Dakota knelt, touching a fingertip to the dried stains. Blood, too little for death, but enough for pain. The wind carried a distant cry of a hawk. His horse shifted nervously beneath him, nostrils flaring. The trail here was wrong, violent. Dakota rose to his feet, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Every instinct in him, every strand of Apache training, told him trouble had wrapped its claws around Aiden's fate. Fear threatened to paralyze him. But love pushed harder. He looked to the horizon, where the trail continued like a thin scar carved into the earth. Aiden. He murmured. It was not a prayer. It was a promise. One the land itself seemed to hear. He mounted again and kicked his heels gently, urging the roan forward. Dust billowed behind them as they left the crossroads and the pass behind. There were questions Dakota needed answered, tracks he needed to follow, people he needed to confront. And if any of them dared to say they harmed his son, they would learn fear, the kind that lived sharp and unyielding in a warrior's heart. As the sun dropped lower, the first sight of civilization emerged from behind a cluster of dying mesquite trees, a small settlement. Barely more than a handful of crooked wooden buildings and a lonely well at its center. Smoke curled from a single chimney, and the distant bleating of goats drifted through the cooling air. Dakota slowed his horse. There was no comfort here, only the promise of answers. The first villager he encountered was a woman hauling a bucket from the well. Her dress was faded, color long stolen by the desert sun, and her skin showed the weary lines of someone who had survived too much. She stiffened when she noticed him, her eyes narrowing with caution. Apache warriors rarely brought peace when they arrived at white settlements, not because they sought war, but because fear made the settlers dangerous. Dakota raised an open hand in greeting, a gesture to show he carried no weapon in reach. "I search for a young man," he said slowly, knowing his English was thick with the cadence of his people. 17. Small in size. Hair the color of dried wheat. Blue eyes. His heart tightened as he spoke, forcing him to swallow his emotion. "His name is Aiden." The woman studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "Not here," she muttered, not unkindly, "just tired. Haven't seen no such boy." Dakota nodded thanks and continued deeper into the settlement. The second person he spoke to was a blacksmith, his arms strong and soot-covered. When Dakota described Aiden, the blacksmith paused, his hammer hovering in the air. "Boy like that passed through maybe 4-5 months ago," he said, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Said he was traveling with the caravan. Looked excited. Too excited." He snorted. "Young ones always are." Dakota leaned forward urgently. "What direction?" "South Road," the man answered, jerking his head behind him. "Toward river crossing." His expression dimmed. "But they say trouble found that caravan. Bandits. Real dangerous kind. Took their time with those travelers." Dakota felt his stomach hollow out. What happened? His voice had turned to gravel without meaning to. The blacksmith shook his head. "Don't know much. Just talk that some were killed. Some scattered. And some weren't found at all. Aiden could have been among them. Lost, hunted, taken." Dakota forced his breath to remain steady. If he lost control now, he would gain nothing. "Is there someone who saw this?" Dakota pressed. The blacksmith hesitated, then nodded. "Elias, old trapper. Lives at the edge of the village. If anyone knows more, it's him." Dakota didn't waste another heartbeat. He rode toward the outskirts where a tattered canvas tent sagged beneath a leaning pole. Outside it sat a man with unkempt hair and a thick beard, mending a rabbit snare with rough fingers. When Dakota approached, Elias glanced up, one eye milky and unfocused. But the other was sharp, too sharp, taking in the stranger before him. "I need information," Dakota said. "Everyone does," the trapper replied, voice scratchy with disuse. "What's the trade?" Dakota pulled from his saddlebag a small piece of cured deer meat, precious on a journey like this. Elias snatched it without thanks, tearing a bite off as though starving. "If the bands of predators you speak of hurt a boy," Dakota began, but Elias cut him off with a dry laugh. "Boy? No," the old trapper said after swallowing. "They weren't hunting a boy. They were hunting information." The warrior's brows narrowed. "Explain." Elias wiped meat grease from his beard. "Caravan was just cover. The kid wasn't with them by accident. Someone was after something he knew." He jabbed his chin toward the horizon. "He ran with them into the river gorge. Folks say some escaped. Others were dragged off. He paused deliberately. But if they caught your boy, whoever paid those bandits will want him kept quiet. Dakota's blood turned molten. Aiden? With information worth killing for? Impossible, unless someone mistook him for someone else. Or he had stumbled upon a secret too dark to forget. Elias's one good eye softened slightly as he saw the warrior's torment. Look, some survived. There's hope in that. But you better move fast. That road leads to places where slavery and death sit at the same table. Dakota nodded, his jaw set. I move now. He mounted once more, heart pounding like war drums. Shadows lengthened across the dirt as night crept closer, but he pressed into the darkness without hesitation. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, bloodshed. But behind him, nothing remained. No home, no peace. No rest. Until he found his son. Dakota's horse moved steadily through the twilight, ears twitching at every distant sound. The warrior's eyes scanned the horizon with a predator's focus. Every settlement, every shadow could hold the boy he sought, or those who meant to harm him. Aiden had been gone for months, yet Dakota felt every moment of his absence as if it were yesterday. Each heartbeat pounded with a mix of fear and determination. By the time he reached the next village, night had fallen. Torches flickered against wooden walls, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. The place was larger than the first, with more people milling about, traders, travelers, and the occasional vagabond seeking coin or shelter. Dakota dismounted quietly, his boots silent against the hard-packed earth. His presence unnoticed among the busy villagers. He began asking quietly about a boy named Aiden. At first, responses were blank stares and polite denials. People in towns like these learned long ago not to interfere with matters that didn't concern them or that involved danger. Finally, an old innkeeper leaned out from his doorway, wiping hands on his apron. A boy, you say? Pretty-faced young? Haven't seen him round here. But maybe someone else has. Folks here talk. Some are worth listening to. Dakota nodded, his jaw tight. He could sense the innkeeper wanted something in return. He reached into his pouch and dropped a few silver coins onto the wooden counter, a small price, but enough to get information. The innkeeper's eyes flicked to the coin, then back to Dakota. I heard of a boy like that, he said cautiously. A bounty hunter picked him up a month back. Said the boy knew too much about things that weren't his business. Kept him a day or two, bragging he'd turn him in for gold if he wanted. Dakota's hand tightened on the strap of his bow. Rage and fear surged together. Whoever this bounty hunter was, he had crossed a line. Aiden wasn't just a boy, he was family. And anyone who dared touch him would answer to Dakota. Where did this hunter go? Dakota asked, his voice low, controlled, yet dangerous. The innkeeper shook his head. No one knows for sure. He moves fast, keeps secrets. Some say he heads west, others say south. But he left the village just 2 nights ago. Dakota exhaled, the air hot in his lungs despite the cool night. He knew he had no time to waste. He mounted his horse, pressing west first, intending to track the hunter before he could vanish completely. As he rode, Dakota thought of the boy's small hands, calloused from work but soft with youth. He remembered the night Aiden had first cried, a sound full of loss and fear, when Dakota had found him alone near a burned-out cabin. He had held him, whispered promises of protection, and never let the boy feel unsafe again. Now, those memories were fuel. Dakota's thoughts sharpened into strategy. He would follow the trail, question anyone who might know the hunter's path, and spare no one who tried to hinder him. Aiden's life was worth more than any coin or threat. Hours passed. The moon rose, pale and bright, revealing traces of passage, hoof prints, Wagon wheels pressed into the dust, a torn piece of cloth snagged on a fence post. Each mark was a whisper from the past, a hint that led Dakota closer to the hunter and to his son. When he stopped for a brief rest, he barely dismounted, wrapping his hands around his knees as he studied the horizon. Every tree, every hillock could hide enemies. His mind raced with possibilities. What if the hunter had already harmed Aiden? What if he had sold the boy to someone crueler than he could imagine? The thought made Dakota's stomach tighten. But beneath the fear burned a steadfast determination. He had faced death before. He had faced men who would see the world burn for coin or pride. But no one had ever touched what he loved without consequence. The trail would grow more dangerous, he knew. Each village brought more uncertainty, more people who might block or mislead him. Yet Dakota would not falter. Aiden's life was a promise he had made, one he would honor. With every ounce of strength and cunning he possessed, mounting his horse once again, he whispered to the night, to the land, and perhaps to the spirits of his ancestors, "No one will take him from me. Not now. Not ever." With that, the warrior disappeared into the darkness, following the path of rumors, traces, and his unyielding heart toward a danger he had yet to see but knew would come. Dakota rode under a sky thick with storm clouds, the wind carrying the scent of smoke long before he saw its source. His heart clenched. Smoke on the wind was never a good sign. His roan horse, sensing the tension in its rider, moved cautiously, ears twitching and nostrils flaring. Hours later, he crested a low hill and saw it, a camp reduced to ashes. Charred remnants of wagons lay strewn across the dirt, splintered wood blackened by fire. The tents were nothing more than skeletal frames, their cloth burned away. Scorched footprints led in and out of the ruins, carrying whispers of violence and chaos. Dakota dismounted and knelt, brushing ash from the dirt with careful hands. The smell of burned wood, charred meat, and smoke lingered thick in the air. This camp had not been abandoned by chance. He could tell immediately. Someone had attacked, taken what they wanted, and left destruction in their wake. He began examining the ruins. Broken tools, scattered belongings, and trampled blankets painted a story of panic and haste. Dakota's hands paused on a small object half buried in the ash. He picked it up, a pendant, small and roughly carved from wood. The sight of it froze his blood. It was Aiden's pendant. Dakota had carved it himself years ago, etching a symbol of protection into the soft wood. He had tied it around the boy's neck when Aiden was barely 10, promising that as long as the pendant remained, the spirits of their ancestors would watch over him. Now, seeing it broken and blackened, Dakota felt a sudden rush of both fear and fury. The boy had been here. Dakota's mind raced, piecing together the evidence. The caravan the boy had traveled with, likely attacked by bandits, as rumors had suggested, had met a violent fate. Some had survived, perhaps, but others had not. And the pendant, burned yet still intact, told him something else. Aiden had been taken. Anger boiled beneath Dakota's calm exterior. He clenched his fists, knuckles whitening against the cold, ash-dusted earth. He had survived countless battles, seen men die in ways too cruel to describe, but the thought of someone harming Aiden ignited a fire unlike any he had felt before. He rose, scanning the horizon. The wind carried faint sounds, the clatter of distant hooves, a dog barking far off, voices muffled and low. Someone was nearby. Perhaps the bandits. Perhaps other travelers. Whoever they were, Dakota would not hesitate. He knelt again, touching the pendant one last time. "You are still mine," he whispered, voice tight with emotion. "I will not fail you, Aiden." The words were more than a vow. They were a promise that carried the weight of his life, his honor, and his love. Dakota spent the next hours examining the camp meticulously. He followed tracks left in the ash and dirt, noting the direction of horses and wagons, and even the faint drag marks of what could have been a small body. Each mark was a breadcrumb in a trail he would not lose. His knowledge of tracking, honed over decades in the wild, allowed him to read the landscape as if it were a book. He traced the prints southward, where the terrain rose into rugged hills and narrow ravines. By nightfall, Dakota made camp a safe distance away, keeping watch over the trail with hawk-like attention. He allowed himself a brief moment to rest, but sleep did not come easily. Every shadow, every creak of wood, every rustle of wind through the brush set his senses on high alert. In the flickering firelight, he studied the broken pendant again. It was a cruel reminder of the dangers Aiden faced, but also a sign that the boy had fought, survived, and left behind this mark of hope. Dakota pressed it to his chest and murmured, "You left me a sign. I will follow it to the end of the earth." And so, with the pendant as a guide and his heart steeled for whatever lay ahead, Dakota prepared to follow the trail into unknown territory, deeper into danger than he had ever been. Determined to reach his son before it was too late, he did not doubt for a second. Aiden was alive. He had to be. And nothing, not fire, not bandits, not the cruelty of men, would stop Dakota from finding him. Dakota rode through the night, guided only by moonlight and the faint traces of tracks left behind. Each step of his horse was deliberate, soft against the hard earth, as though even the smallest sound might alert those who had taken Aiden. The pendant he had found in the burned camp rested against his chest, a silent talisman that reminded him of the boy's presence. Even in absence. By dawn, the third settlement came into view. Unlike the last two villages, this one had a harsh, almost dangerous feel. High wooden fences surrounded it, with guards pacing along the top, eyes sharp and restless. The settlement seemed more like a fortress than a home, and the people inside carried themselves with wary suspicion. Rumors had always traveled fast in such places, and Dakota had learned long ago that whispers often held more truth than spoken words. He dismounted at the edge of town, leaving his horse hidden in the shadow of a rock outcropping. Every instinct in him told him danger was close. He entered cautiously, moving from building to building, asking questions quietly, observing faces for signs of recognition. At first, the answers were the same as always. "No boy by that name here," "I don't know anyone like that," or simply silence. But persistence was Dakota's weapon. He knew the boy's description by heart: small, wiry, with wheat-colored hair and blue eyes that gleamed with trust and hope. It was a trader, a wiry man with a thin scar across his cheek, who finally spoke. Dakota described Aiden, watching the man's reaction closely. The trader paled. "A boy like that?" he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. I think I saw him. Weeks ago, taken by men with horses, sold. Sold at the auction?" Dakota froze. "Auction?" His voice was low, dangerous, carrying the weight of promise and threat. The trader swallowed hard. "A secret one. They bring people from all over, children, workers, anyone with value. It's not legal. No law reaches this place. The man who runs it, a cruel rancher by the edge of the hills, he buys and sells without mercy. I've heard him described as unkind, worse than bandits. If your boy was sold there—" He trailed off, fear obvious in his eyes. Dakota's blood ran hot. The first camp, the burned caravan, the bounty hunter, everything pointed to this final, cruel truth. Aiden was alive, but in the hands of men who would break him for profit. The thought alone made Dakota's fists clench so tightly his nails dug into his palms. He left the trader without a word of thanks, his pace swift and determined as he made his way to the hills. The road was rough, littered with loose stones and twisted brush, but Dakota barely noticed the terrain. His focus was singular, the boy's life. Every step, every heartbeat, carried the weight of vengeance and protection. As he rode, Dakota remembered the first time he had held Aiden, a tiny, abandoned child, shivering and afraid, alone in the wilderness. How he had whispered promises that day, that he would protect him, that he would never let harm reach him. Those promises had become vows etched into his very being. Now, years later, the boy was older, stronger, but still his responsibility. And he would not fail. He stopped at a rise in the hills, surveying the path ahead. In the distance, the outlines of buildings could be made out, large wooden structures with fences and guard posts. It had the look of a place where men kept their power by fear. Somewhere within those walls, Aiden waited, vulnerable, alone, unaware that his protector was on the way. Dakota's mind was sharp, calculating. He would not rush blindly. He would watch. He would plan. Every guard, every routine, every weakness he could discern would be noted. He had faced armies before, and now he faced men who would think themselves clever in hiding a boy. As night fell, he crept closer, shadows masking his presence. The air smelled faintly of smoke and iron, the signs of human activity, of captivity. Dakota pressed forward silently, knowing that the next step would be the most dangerous yet. He had reached the edge of the storm. Ahead lay the cruelest test he had ever faced, but fear did not touch him. Only determination. Only the singular thought, Aiden must be saved. He whispered into the darkness, more to himself than anyone else, "Hold on, my son. I am coming." And with that, Dakota melted into the night, tracking the whispers of the settlement, following the scent of cruelty and hope toward the boy who had become his life. Dakota crouched behind a ridge, his breath steady despite the pounding of his heart. Below, the ranch sprawled like a fortress, its wooden walls tall and unforgiving, fences lined with watchmen and torches casting long, leaping shadows. Somewhere inside, Aiden was trapped, vulnerable, frightened, and perhaps even beaten. The thought sharpened Dakota's focus to a fine edge. There would be no hesitation tonight. He studied the patterns of the guards. Two walked along the fence, passing each other in slow, predictable intervals. Another lingered near the gate, dozing lightly in the warm glow of a torch. Dakota counted his timing carefully, calculating the distance and the angle, the shadows he could use as cover. Every instinct honed over decades of hunting and surviving in the wild guided him. The warrior slid down the slope, silent as a whisper, the dark fabric of his clothing blending with the night. His bow rested across his back, quiver tight, knife strapped to his thigh. He moved with patience, like a predator circling its prey, and his prey was more precious than any beast he had ever stalked. Inside the courtyard, a soft cry carried through the night air. Dakota's ears twitched. The sound came again, quieter this time, but unmistakable. His blood surged. Aiden. Alive. He followed the sound carefully, skirting the shadows of the stable and sidestepping crates stacked near the barn. Every muscle in his body coiled like spring steel, ready to react to any threat. Then, through a half-open door, he saw him. Aiden, sitting on a rough wooden floor, knees drawn to his chest, eyes wide and wet with tears. His small frame trembled, bruises marking his arms and face. "Aiden," Dakota whispered, voice low but urgent. The boy's head jerked up. Recognition and relief flooded his eyes. "Dakota!" His voice cracked, disbelief and hope mingling. You found me?" The warrior nodded, crouching near the door, his presence a shield of protection. "I told you I would," he said simply. "I will always find you." Aiden's arm shot around Dakota's neck, clutching him with all the strength of a child clinging to life. Dakota felt the small body shaking against him and tightened his grip, murmuring words of comfort. "It's all right. You are safe now. I'm here. I will not leave you." The moment of relief was brief. Outside, footsteps approached. The guards had heard something, a cry, a movement. Dakota eased Aiden down and scanned the room. There was a small window near the back, just large enough for a quick escape. He lifted the boy gently, whispering instructions. "Hold tight. Do exactly as I say. No noise. Do you understand?" Aiden nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I trust you, Dakota." Dakota's jaw tightened. That trust was sacred, the very reason he would not fail. He slipped out the window first, landing silently on the ground, then helped Aiden down. Together they pressed against the shadows, moving toward the ridge where Dakota had left his horse. The faint clink of a chain or a creak of wood outside reminded him how close danger still was. A sudden shout rang from the courtyard. One of the guards had spotted something, or perhaps heard a footstep too late. Dakota's eyes flashed. With a swift motion, he pulled his knife, silent and deadly, cutting the ropes that had restrained a gate latch. He motioned for Aiden to move faster. The boy obeyed without hesitation, driven by fear and the knowledge that Dakota would protect him. The roan horse waited patiently, muscles tensed. Dakota lifted Aiden onto the saddle, then swung up behind him, holding him tight. The horse sprang forward, hooves striking the earth in a thunderous rhythm that masked their escape from the ranch. Torches blurred into streaks of orange and red behind them as guards scrambled in confusion. Dakota's eyes, however, never left the boy. Aiden's head rested against his chest, bruised and battered, but alive. Safe dot as they rode into the open night, the wind whipping across their faces, Aiden finally whispered, voice trembling, I tried to write. They took everything." Dakota tightened his hold. "You tried. That's enough. You are here now. Nothing else matters. Not the past, not what they did. Only that you are alive and we are going home." For the first time in what felt like months, Aiden allowed himself to relax completely, leaning into Dakota's strength. And for the warrior, every pounding heartbeat, every labored breath of the boy, was a victory greater than any battle he had ever fought. The night was still and silent around them as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving the cruel ranch and the dangers it held far behind. For Dakota, one thought remained clear. Aiden was safe, and he would never let him go again. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon as Dakota guided his horse along a familiar trail. Aiden sat before him, small and worn, but alive, clinging to the reins with a fragile grip. The night's darkness had faded, and with it came a sense of relief so profound that even the open desert seemed softer, less threatening. Dakota's heart was still heavy with all he had witnessed: the burned camp, the cruel auction, the violence the boy had endured. Yet now, as he glanced back at Aiden, he felt a surge of triumph and love stronger than any fear. He had promised to protect this child, and he had kept that vow. Aiden's eyes were wide and weary, the bruises along his face a cruel reminder of the past months. Yet there was also a spark of hope, of trust rekindled. He looked up at Dakota, his voice trembling but filled with gratitude. I thought you might not find me." Dakota shook his head slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I told you I would, Aiden. I never said it lightly. No matter how far, no matter how dangerous, I would always find you." For a while, they rode in silence, letting the wind carry away the remnants of fear and exhaustion. The desert stretched wide around them, a canvas of gold and rust, silent witnesses to the trials they had endured. Dakota's hands rested lightly on the reins, yet his mind was alert, scanning every hill and ridge for signs of danger. But now the road felt less threatening, and the boy beside him was finally safe as the sun rose higher. They approached the edge of Dakota's homeland, where the familiar shapes of the Apache lodges and the community of the tribe came into view. Smoke spiraled from chimneys, and the distant laughter of children reached them, a sound that made Aiden's face brighten despite the weariness. The boy's eyes glistened with tears he could no longer hold back. When they arrived, the tribe gathered, murmuring in amazement. Dakota dismounted and lifted Aiden from the horse, holding him close. The boy's arms wrapped around him tightly, and Dakota could feel the tension and terror slowly melting away. The elders and families approached, awe and relief etched into their faces. Aiden's first words, soft and reverent, were for Dakota alone. "You kept your promise. You really kept it." Dakota pressed the small, worn pendant, the one he had found at the burned camp, into Aiden's hand. "This is yours, always. It guided me to you. And it will remind you that no matter what happens, someone will always fight for you." The boy nodded, clutching the talisman as if it were a lifeline. His eyes, once haunted by fear, now held gratitude and trust deeper than any spoken words could convey. That evening, in the quiet of the lodge, Aiden produced a new letter, carefully folded, written with careful, steady handwriting. I wrote this for you, for the first time since I left," he said. "I wanted you to have it, but I never knew if I would get the chance." Dakota took the letter gently, reading the words silently. Every line spoke of hope, of love, of a bond that distance and danger could not sever. The boy's words captured the life he had lived, the struggles he had endured, and the gratitude he felt for the man who had never abandoned him. When he finished, Dakota folded the letter carefully and looked into Aiden's eyes. "No more letters," he said softly, his voice steady and full of warmth. "You are here. You are alive, and that is all that matters." Aiden smiled, a small, genuine smile, and for the first time in months, he felt completely safe. He understood now that home was not a building or a place, but a presence, the unwavering protection and love of Dakota, the warrior who had never stopped searching for him. The tribe celebrated quietly that night, but Dakota and Aiden remained together, sitting beneath the stars, speaking little, listening to the desert's whispers, and letting the silence carry the comfort they had so desperately sought. For Dakota, every hardship, every mile, every danger he had faced faded into insignificance when measured against the small, trusting hand in his own. Aiden was alive. Aiden was safe. And that promise, forged in fire, fear, and love, had been kept at last, the warrior whispered, as he often did, more to himself than anyone else. "No letters. You are here. And that is enough." The boy pressed closer, and together they watched the first light of dawn spill over the land, knowing that whatever storms came next, they would face them side by side, unbroken, unshaken, and finally home.